Well, it has been a wonderful day of learning and having conversation. And as Fred and Reggie make their way up here for some final conversation to lead you in, I'm thankful for each of them and what they've each shared with us. I'm just thinking about all of this together and how these were two very, very different lectures. And you know, lecture almost seems like a strange word for it because both of them, I think, were probably more sermons than anything else, but to me anyway. But these were two very different lectures, and yet I can see some common threads through them, and I'm sure you can as well. And so I'm just gonna, I'm gonna kind of step out of the way and invite you all to continue in conversation with Dr. Blount and Dr. Edie before they depart. We're going to go till about 3:30 unless you are done before that, but we do have about 25 minutes or so to be able to have some conversation. And I can travel with the mic, and if you're online, we will field your questions and we can even read your comments if you have your own reflections to read as well. So. Do either of you have anything that you want to?
Want to start, Fred?
Sure. So I am listening to Reggie. Perhaps like many of you, I was really struck by the die-in at Candler, the students laying down in the courtyard of Candler, having exited worship, and we sometimes want to make pretty strong contrasts. Maybe we can blame this on Micah between our liturgical festivals and the work of justice. But for me, I mentioned this to Reggie. For me, that seemed like a kind of public liturgy that was itself a work of justice. And so I would just note that those are the kinds of links that I think are really important to forge, that people can see connections between what we do in our sanctuaries and what we do in the world. Just a thought.
Fred talked about young people basically being wired to lead with their hearts. And he referenced there's some neurological justification for some of that. And I often share with my students much of that as well. There's two major growth activity that's taking place in the brain during adolescence. One is the amygdala, which is an almond-shaped portion in the center of the brain that controls instinct, fight or flight, emotion, instinct. And as that's maturing, there's another portion of the brain that's maturing called the prefrontal cortex, which controls judgment, clarity, safety. Well, the amygdala is maturing much faster than the prefrontal cortex. And some studies suggest that the prefrontal cortex doesn't come into full maturation to 25. So the portion that is supposed to give some kind of guidance to the instinct, impulse, fight or flight, emotion is not fully ready to do that well until about 25. And so many of the decisions that young people make, understandably to Fred's sharing, is from the heart. It's emotion first, then logic, then cognitive thinking. If that's the case, then the question becomes not to push against their desire to lead with their hearts, but how do we help them lead with their hearts in healthy ways? how do we help them make, or kind of borrowing from John Lewis, how do we help them get into good trouble? And you heard me just drop this bomb on y'all right before the break about all of the disciples were high schoolers, young adults. They were leading with their hearts. Jesus becomes this masterful youth ministry leader in guiding these disciples to be able to take over work to change the world. How can we provide a space and place to really help young people get into good trouble? What are your questions or comments or insights? And I don't know about Fred, but I'm always willing to take pushback as well. That's where good conversation comes in. So, what are your thoughts?
I am a brand new pastor at a church that is not in the city, so I am completely out of my element. We do have teens and young adults that because I'm new, they are springboarded and ready. They are positioned to be a church that does mission. They're also springboarded to be a church that includes the youth, and they're all very excited to do that. They don't know how, and so they're all looking to me. And I don't really know how, because I think it's a blanket statement to say that all young people are into social justice issues when some people see social justice warriors as a negative thing. And so I was wondering if either of you have any advice for me on how to talk to the teens and young adults about getting them involved in our worship and in the mission of our church.
So let me quickly say this. I recognize, and I'll just be honest, to my chagrin, that social justice has been relegated to being something negative. Because I think that we find too many instances in our Christian Bible that calls for issues of righteousness and justice. But we don't have to lean into that terminology. We don't have to use social justice. Again, I would ask, as I did before our break, can we examine the ways of Jesus that we find in the Gospels? Can we spend some time with Matthew 25, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. You don't have to call that social justice. You don't have to call that social impact. You can just call it the way of Jesus. And what does it mean for us to then engage in the way of Jesus? I would think it would be very hard to argue about, this is what Scripture says Jesus did, and then we say, oh no, we can't do that. And so we focus on the way of Jesus. We don't have to get caught up in political language and this, that, and the other. Just the way of Jesus. What was the way and the work of Jesus? And where do we see those opportunities where we are?
Yeah, if I just add a bit, was it Chenda?
Chenda, yeah.
Chenda. So her question a little bit earlier was along these lines, at least with the missional part, that how can we recover our language that resists some of the politicization of the social justice language. At least that's what I'm saying that she said now. She's not here to defend herself. And so for me, this is one of the dynamics of formation that deals with the identity of God. And And it converges with the third one as well, that one of the things that Christians can say, we say out of our convictions, we use our language to describe God as a missionary. God is a sending God who is not content until all are gathered into God's arms. And Reggie has told this story, the Matthew 25 story repeatedly. That means, it means all those things that the book of Isaiah said Jesus preaches on: the feeding of the hungry, the freeing of the imprisoned, etc. And so that's our language. That's not like the platform of the Democratic Party. That's our language, and so I think we should use it. The issue of how to engage these young people who are enthused. I mean, what a great problem! That is fantastic. And so I'd like to say, well, just follow my diagram. But truthfully, you have this opportunity to invite people to bring their gifts into worship, to bring their gifts into mission and outreach, and that will require invitation and then loving accompaniment, like making sure that that they are equipped. This was language that came from the woman on the video, that they're equipped to share these gifts. It's not rocket science. It's a matter of invitation and accompaniment and equipping. And then maybe after people engage in whatever it is, where a 20-something leads the community walk for hunger or something, that you help them get ready. You're there with them as they lead, and when it's done and the dust settles, maybe sit back and say, well, what was this like for you? Where was God in the mix of your leadership and our hunger walk? What is your sense about what kind of God this is? And those kinds of stand back and reflect questions let people not only claim the grace, the goodness of what they engaged in, but it helps them to see more clearly going forward. So this is a pedagogy that I use all the time. I teach my students this. I used it in congregations. I still would. It's this preparation, participation, and reflection over and over again. If it's young people contributing their gifts to worship, if it's young people stepping out in pursuit of justice, if it's a first ever intergenerational intentional gathering, it's preparation, participation, and reflection. That at all get to where you were, the kind of thing you were asking?
I have a question, unless, Sarah, go for it. Okay, I'll come back to you later. Just because since I have the microphone, I'm thinking about what you just now said, or both of your responses to that question, but also one of the common threads that I saw or heard in both of your lectures, and that is this idea that we're all being formed and shaped morally and spiritually by something,
all the time,
and by some community. And as you're both talking about that in very different ways, but both got to that point, which made me think of this idea that Stanley Hauerwas has, that the problem is that we're a part of too many communities of formation, and we haven't decided which one to allow to shape us the most, or we've decided the wrong one. I'm like very loosely paraphrasing him here, but so I guess my thought/question for you is, how as the church do we help people to actually examine how they're being formed by things outside of the way of Jesus? How do we help them to examine the types of formation that we're not often aware of, that we're all being formed in different ways? I mean, just as an example, here in this region, those of us who are in this room who have lived in this region for quite some time know that a big part of this region is formed and shaped by the liturgy of the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? But we would not call it that, being formed as Pittsburgh Steelers fans, but that is very much a part of this culture, right? How do we help people name the ways that they're formed and help them to see, or help them to, essentially choose the way of Jesus as their community of formation? That makes sense.
You want to go?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, well, you invite folks to read Jamie Smith's "You Are What You Love." It's a popular book in which he covers this terrain that we're lovers as much or more than thinkers. He talks about cultural liturgies, and it's so I think brilliant and immediately accessible. I mean, you don't have to go far into the Pittsburgh Steelers where people begin to see the quasi-liturgical enactment that happens every home game, and the way desires are evoked and oriented to the triumph of the Steelers, the victory over the evil opponents. So you just you do that. It's a kind of imagination, and in part a critical imagination, because not only are people able to see in a new way, but they can also respond to the question, in what way are our hearts being lured toward ends that aren't Christian? And that might be a hard thing. It might take some courage from a leader, because there are ends that people have assumed, in America anyway, that are Christian, like God bless America, and that competition is good. There's always victor and vanquished. Other than that, what do we have? We have socialism, God forbid. There's that much. I'm leaving you how do we show the opposite? I mean, how do we highlight our own way, if you wish?
So as you asked your question, I couldn't help but go to that adage, how do you know if a bill is counterfeit? You don't determine whether or not a bill is counterfeit by studying the counterfeit bill. You know that a bill is counterfeit by studying the real thing. And we don't spend enough time studying the real thing. It's hard to engage in critical thought and reflection without having been rooted in the foundation of the real thing. So we can't have a strong argument against the things that seem to be counter to our Christian faith if we have not done a good deep dive ourselves into the real thing. So spend some time helping people study the real thing, and then be in a conversation of contrast. Does this match up with what we now have learned to be the way of Jesus? If it doesn't, then we're left with a choice.
This is just one quick comment. This is connected somehow in Jamie Smith's book, "You Are What You Love." There's a copy of a famous painting. I'm told it's famous. I'd never seen it before, and it's the boy, somebody like Horatio Alger, like some British admiral of the fleet who was instrumental in defending Great Britain from Spain, this is the admiral as a little boy, And the little boy is looking up, and there's this old salt kind of telling them a story. You can see it's gesturing to the little boy, the seas in the background. And the caption of the painting is something like, we don't teach, sorry I'm butchering this so bad, we don't teach, if you want people to become great sailors, you don't start with the technique and the different lines and the various nautical terms. You make them long for the sea. And so maybe that's instructed to us. It's not just about technique or how many bishops there are, how many bishops it takes to make a minion. It's not like the Christian, is it 10? It's not Christian facts and figures. It's instilling desire in our hearts for the sea.
Thank you. That was really beautiful, and I hate to move on from it. Okay. Challenging questions for each of you. Probably reflections, not answers, is what I would ask. I have a mixed denominational background, and among those experiences, so you first on my left, among those experiences is one in a high energy, charismatic, non-denom context. We have the full stretch, right? Like we have the intense, high energy preaching. The worship is very embodied, constantly the get hype, high emotions. Those experiences are there. My experience of this context was that it was kind of a revolving door. People would get drawn in by some of these things, but then the promises of this is so exciting, this is life-changing, were never delivered on. It wasn't actually life-changing. It was time-consuming, and when people figured that out, they left. So I guess reflecting on Smith's wisdom about how we're formed by our habits, what is the thing, right? If we're amplifying our liturgies, what's the meat underneath there? What's the thing that we would want to draw people to? For you, a little bit of the opposite question. I heard a lot of energy around, discipleship in the sense of including the younger generations, particularly justice, as a focus of what Jesus has charged us to do. I'm also in touch with less charismatic mainline Protestant clergy and other people in that world. And there's some anxiety, I think, about continuity of certain articles of the Christian religion, creeds, rituals, liturgies, and I hear an invitation to have us stretch to beyond, that's not number one priority. Is there any place for the importance of continuity as we seek sort of the spirit of Jesus' mission? Is there any concrete stuff we have to hold on to, and why or why not? Yeah.
I'll let you go first.
Okay. So when I use the phrase worship at full stretch, that's a phrase that came to me from one of my teachers, Don Salyers, who's a theologian and worship professor. And by full stretch, I took him to mean, and I voiced this earlier, that the kind of the fullness of the potential isn't minimized for the sake of efficiency or scaring people, but that the the meal around the table looks like a meal, etc. But at full stretch also means the kind of fullness of the divine ethos meeting up against human pathos. So it's one thing to go to worship that, like praise and worship, that's all joyous, upbeat, double fortissimo, major key, and that's that. But that needs to find tension with the reality of human suffering and divine suffering. And those kinds of creative tensions are, I think, the key to authentic worship and authentic discipleship. So I'm a lover of tradition. You hear me propagandizing around the sacraments all day long. So the tradition matters, but so too does the opportunity to kind of innovate upon sacramental practice. That that we might have Holy Communion after we've spent a day gleaning. So that's another one of those creative tensions. And so the best answer I have for you is that the truth exists in those kinds of tensions.
Could you just say a little bit more about this yearning for continuity? So I'm going to say, of course, that's okay. What I would want the church to do, and the reason there's been so much emphasis about youth and young adults, because that's where we live, but my hope for discipleship, engaging in the work of discipleship, is for all who call on the name of Jesus. And the giving of oneself, the commitment to spiritual disciplines, the commitment to sacraments are a necessity. But I would want the church to wrestle with, to what end? When it's all said and done, to what end? As we engage in these practices, what is it that Jesus is calling us to do with that? And I recognize that there will be many that may not agree, but I don't think to what end is to just sit with, I've engaged in the sacraments and that's it. We all have a calling. And if I could say this, as in another life, I have a BS degree in chemical engineering. And so when God had jokes and called me into ministry, I took engineering class. I didn't take humanities, a lot of humanities and all of that. So this whole world of theology and religion was new to me when I got to seminary. What was helpful in helping to make some sense of this life that I am now entering into was reading a book by one of my mentors, James Fowler, that had this quote from Frederick in it. And it has guided my life. I know there's been a lot of conversation of and critique of it, but it's been devotional to me. The place that God called you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. The place that God called you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. When I engage in the work of spiritual disciplines, when I engage in the work, when I engage in the participation of sacraments, it's leading me to live out my deep gladness connected with the world's deep hunger. It moves me to live out my call. And I am one who believes that everyone has a call, not just those called to ordained ministry, but everyone has a call.
Thank you, both of you, Dr. Edie and Dr. Blount, for everything today. We thank them.
Thank you.
And thank you for the lovely conversation and for being with us today. We're so glad that you were able to join us here, those of you who are here in the Knox room and those of you who are online. We're just glad you're able to be here for this Albright-Deering lecture in 2024. Just as you leave, if you did not notice on your way in, there is a list of some upcoming events and news in the Office of Continuing Ed here. And so because I'm new, we're in a time of transition, so there's a lot yet to come that is not yet out, but there are some things happening here at the seminary. If you are not a part of, and I'll just give my own little plug, if you're not a part of or not signed up for our continuing education newsletter here, I'd encourage you to do so. Every other month you'll get some updates about what's going on here in the Office of Continuing Ed. There's also lots of other things going on here outside of Continuing Ed as well, and you can sign up for newsletters for all of it on our website. Again, thank you for coming. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for the conversation. And again, Fred and Reggie, thank you for everything you've done.